The fragrance of selfless love that has drawn the world into one family. The truth of an eternal message that has been revealed through every act and word. The fulfillment in service that has been taught by relentless sacrifice. The Lord's own life is indeed His message.
Sai Ram, and welcome to the 28th episode in our month-long teleserial entitled Message of the Lord. As we approach the end, we need to zoom in on what really is the bottom line. Fortunately, Bhagwan Baba has already done our work, and what we need to do is just draw your attention to what he has already said, maybe adding a few footnotes here and there. But to get to the bottom line just mentioned, let us start with what Bhagwan Baba often asks us to do, namely, place a ceiling on our desires. I know we discussed this earlier, but I wish to revisit this theme again as it would help us get started with this episode. By the way, many people are shocked when they hear about ceiling on desires for the first time. They think that trying to curb one's desires is too drastic a step. It's like robbing all fun out of life.
What they don't realize is that Baba is not asking us to wear sackcloth, smear ourselves with ash and withdraw into the forest. Not at all. What Swami is telling us is to be a little restrained in yielding to all our desires, and this he does for highly practical as well as spiritual reasons. Let us first look at the purely practical side. Say there is a person, maybe 35 or 40, who has a lot of money and does not have to work for a living. So what does this person do? He just sits in front of a TV set and goes on seeing everything that appears on the screen. Of course he has a remote and therefore does not even have to get up, as was required in the good old days. Pressing buttons, he keeps wandering amongst the hundreds of channels now readily available. And while he is busy glued to the TV, he is also busy downing bag after bag of potato chips. We all know what ultimately happens to this couch potato. He becomes awfully fat and develops all kinds of heart problems. There was absolutely no need for this young person to ruin his God-given health in this manner. And yet he did it because he could not control his desires. Watching TV and eating potato chips may not be evil, but anything in excess can and does become harmful and dangerous. This was a case of one person bringing ruin on himself. There is also the example of the desires of many combining massively to cause problems to society as a whole. Many examples can be given, but I shall restrict to just one. Take vehicular traffic. These days, there is so much of traffic in almost all parts of the world. Roads are full of cars in rich countries. The same is the case in countries not so rich too. Attention is being drawn to this because every vehicle consumes fossil fuel, and when that fuel is burnt in a motor vehicle, carbon dioxide is emitted. We hardly realize how many hundreds of millions of vehicles are on the roads of the world every single day, and how many thousands of tons of carbon dioxide they are pumping into the atmosphere. And now, it is universally agreed that carbon dioxide emission is one of the principal reasons for climate change. I brought this up because if you think seriously about it, not all travel is really necessary. When people have plenty of money to spend, all sorts of desires crop up, and in the process of fulfilling those desires, people tend to travel a lot. Sometimes travel cannot be avoided. But how many think of walking or riding a bike and so on? Even if it is possible, these days, such options are simply dismissed. To make matters worse, in many societies, such options have even been made dangerous. The point I am making is that if everyone decides to be strict with desires, and if society too does its bit to help in this, then automatically a lot of travel would come down. In turn, that would straight away start improving matters where air pollution is concerned. In simple terms, sealing on desires, if practiced on a large enough scale, could in fact bring about macro changes for the better.
So much for a case of sealing on desires, if one is needed at all. By the way, you would have noticed that thus far, we did not bring in spirituality at all. We shall reserve that for later. But meanwhile, let us ask, where does this desire spring from? If you have watched this series right from the beginning, you would know the answer right away. From the mind.
How come desires spring in the mind? Because the mind is dragged into the outside world, which is full of things that arouse desire. In other words, if the issue of sealing on desires has to be tackled, we must clearly start with the mind. The mind, Baba says, is nothing but a bundle of thoughts. Maybe that sounds a bit difficult, but let us ask, how do thoughts appear in the mind? They do so in two ways. Firstly, when the senses make contact with some objects or events in the world. For example, you may be window shopping. You see attractive things in the shop and your mind begins to dwell on them. That is one way in which thoughts occur. Alternately, you may be sitting somewhere and your mind may be recalling that window shopping trip you took. That's the second way in which thoughts arise. In general, for thoughts to occur, there must be contact with some objects or some association with some person or events. Okay, what has all this got to do with sealing on desires? Very simple. Let us start from the fact that desires arise in the mind. Now suppose you generate some other thoughts in that same mind so that those connected with desire are pushed out. You may ask, like what? I would reply, maybe thoughts about wonderful darshans of Swami you have had. So, deflection of thought is possible. You might argue, however, that diverting attention from something one desires and craves for to something that is not connected with physical desires would be very difficult. I understand that. For example, when a kid is playing, say, a video game, if dad comes and says, "Son, no more games now, you have to do your homework," the kid surely would not be happy, that is for sure. I mean, which kid would like to do homework instead of playing? However, if one really loves God, if a devotee really loves Baba, as devotees often claim, then a change of attention should not be difficult. That is why, these days, Baba says the first priority must be Deva Priti, or love for God. Now this immediately raises the question, how exactly does one love God? A lot has been written and said on this subject. However, there is no need to be confused by all that. As always, Baba makes it very simple. He says, if you really want to love God, you must also develop a great fear of sin, or Papa Bhiti.
Papa Bhiti,
fear of sin,
Sangadhiti. ఈ మూడు కూడాను ముఖ్యమైనటువంటివిగా భావిస్తున్నాము.
Fear of sin, love for God, morality in society are very
ఈ
important.
మొరాలిటీ
This raises a new question. What exactly is sin? Swami has answered that one also.
It is for the sake of
He says, Sin is anything that would cause pain to God. You know what I do not like, don't you? I would, for example, not like you to have bad company. There are a number of other things I do not like. Waste of time, waste of money, and so on. All this has been explained in many discourses. So it is not at all difficult to find out what I would not like you to do. Thus, provided you really love me, it is quite easy for you to avoid doing all that displeases me. With all those tips, the close connection between Deva Priti, or love of God, and Papa Bhiti, or fear of sin, should not be difficult to understand. Basically, if one meticulously avoids doing all that God would be unhappy about, then one is well on the road to truly loving God. So that is how love for God and fear of sin get tied together. I hope you follow that.
Well, listen here. I still do not see what all this has got to do with sealing on desires. I do not see how all this is going to help save the world, for example. I mean, if I love Baba, avoid bad company, etc., etc., how is that going to help, say, solve the climate change problem, for instance?
Good point. To arrive at an answer to your question, one must first understand better about what exactly is meant by God when one says love God. And that, by the way, would also help clarify better the issue of what is sin. And when you put the two together, it would resolve your doubt. Let's try and do that, shall we?
The first thing we must learn is that God is omnipresent. That is to say, He is present in every single entity in the universe. He may not be directly visible, but His power is very much there in some form or the other in all that exists in the universe, from the tiniest atom to the vast galaxies. As Baba repeatedly reminds us, everything in this universe is in fact nothing but God. That in turn means that when we say we love God, we must love everything in the universe. You may say, "Come on, be serious. I'm scared of the tiger. How can I love the tiger?" Swami has the answer. Loving the tiger does not mean you should scratch its back or fondle it like you would do with a cat. It just means that you do not cause harm to the tiger in any way, which is a very serious point considering how rapidly the tiger is being hunted out of existence at the present time. Swami says people in ancient India worshipped animals and even the snake. They worshipped birds, plants, mountains, rivers, oceans, and so on. They also worshipped musical instruments, tools and implements, and of course, books. Now, why on earth did the ancients in India do all this? They did so because they saw God in everything. In other words, the omnipresence of God really meant something to them. Okay, they saw God everywhere, but how did it make them any better? That's a good question. And the answer to that actually turns out to be quite simple. You see, if you see God in anything, you would not hurt it or harm in any way. Thus, people in olden times did not unnecessarily cut down trees, which is why forests remained pristine for thousands of years. Yet, in the name of colonization and progress, forests that existed for thousands of years got cut down in a couple of hundred years. What you see in this visual is how the forest cover of America has shrunk from 1620, when the first settlers landed, to the present time. That's awful, is it not? You know, we can say all we want about requiring land for agriculture, highways, cities, airports and what have you, but if we have to harm Mother Nature in such a massive way, it is really something to worry about. I mean, how can we say we love God and still do such things? Do you know that at the beginning of the 20th century, there were about 40,000 tigers in the Indian subcontinent? And do you know how many tigers there were in 2001? 3,642. And do you know what the number was in 2008? 1,411. Terrible, is it not? I am sure that most of you know that the Ganges is considered to be the holiest river in India. Even today, thousands worship it every day. Millions may worship the Ganges every day, but hardly anyone seems to be bothered about the incredible pollution that is being dumped into the river all over the place and non-stop. And yet hardly anyone seems to be bothered. Which is why Swami once told students, they tell you that ancients were savages and uncivilized. Why? Because they worshipped stones, snakes, animals and so on. That's what they say. But who is it that has made forests disappear? Who is it that has made whole species of animals disappear? Who is it that has polluted air, water and even land so massively? The ancients or modern man? When modern man is causing so much harm to nature from whom he came, what does it say of his sense of gratitude, or for that matter, his intelligence? How dare these people call ancients fools and superstitious? Let's get back to Daiva Priti and Papa Bhiti and link them to all this before we wind up. You see, if one truly loves God, then that person would see God everywhere. If one sees God everywhere, then one would not harm anyone or anything, be it a person or an animal or an insect or a tree or even air, water, land, etc. On the contrary, seeing God in them all, he would worship all these entities comprehensively as Mother Nature. Now, when a person loves all and harms none, then that person is sure to be very helpful and do all he can to spread joy in society. Now imagine lots and lots of people joining together to do this. What do you think would happen? There would be peace and harmony. That is exactly what Swami wants. That is why Baba says again and again that Daiva Priti, or love for God, and Papa Bhiti, or fear of sin, would in a coherent combination lead to Sangha Niti, or morality in society on a truly macro scale. People complain all the time about corruption and what not. Now, if large numbers of people really love God and truly fear sin, then how can corruption survive? Which brings us back to where we started, namely sealing on desires. A society in which morality is dead is as good as a dead society. And that exactly is what we would create if desire takes deep root in everyone. So maybe you now see why we started with sealing on desires before leading on to something that Bhagavan Baba often tells us these days, namely Daiva Priti and Papa Bhiti, working closely and on a large enough scale alone can lead to Sangha Niti. This, by the way, is how sealing on desires gets connected to spirituality. I hope I have succeeded in explaining that. One thing that comes out of all this, and which should be pretty obvious, is that the less time we spend on pandering to our desires, the more time we would have for thinking about Swami and working for him. Which brings us to an important topic, namely, what Swami expects of us all. Many years ago, there used to be a devotee known as Charles Penn. He was one of the early devotees to come from America. Deeply spiritual in nature, he loved Swami very much and was blessed with intimate contacts with the Lord during his intense meditations. During one of those meditations, Baba gave Penn an important message, which Penn later presented at a conference. Penn reported that this is what Baba said to him. "My mission has reached a point in time when each one of you has work to do. Planet Earth has a purpose in the great galaxy in which it is held. That purpose is unfolding before your eyes. I call upon you to radiate the devotion within you so that its power will envelop all those who come into your orbit. You are my instruments from whom this love would radiate. The intensity of my love would be felt throughout the world. I have prepared you for this and have drawn you to me. My work is ceaseless, and so too is your work without an end. The time is approaching when all humanity would live in harmony. That time would be here sooner than you think. As each one of you performs your silent work, I will embrace you to my heart, and you would feel my presence within you. My beloved devotees, be about my work. Your breath would then carry the scent of the blossoms of heaven. Your example would be that of the angels, and your day would be my joy." That is Swami's message to all of us, conveyed via Mr. Penn.
Blessed and fortunate are we to be alive when the Lord is walking on earth. And even more blessed are we to be chosen as a part of His mission. Of course, the blessing is both a privilege and also a great responsibility. 2 more episodes remain in our teleserial, which would be in the nature of a conclusion, setting the stage for the grand 85th celebrations of our beloved Swami. Thank you for being with us. Jai Sai Ram.